So, imagine this. You're a volunteer drone pilot or an aid worker, and you're in this village that's just been affected by a terrible cyclone. A bunch of people died, a bunch of homes were destroyed. And you're using a drone to make a map of this community to facilitate, disaster reconstruction, assessing the damage, all the stuff that humanitarians usually do. And after you're done making this high-resolution, fantastic drone map, you upload this drone map to an open source data website, which is something we do a lot of the time now in the humanitarian sector, so that other people can learn from it and use it and make tools from it. That's all great, but then you discover, about a couple weeks after you uploaded this drone map, that there was an ethnic minority that lived in that village that are being targeted by a violent local militia. And you discover, to your horror, that this local militia has used your drone map to plan a really effective attack on this village. They've killed people. So your drone imagery, despite your best intentions, has been used to harm people, even to kill them. What do? What are your responsibilities or your obligations? Was there a way you could have prevented this from happening? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So my name's Faine Greenwood, and I work on humanitarian technology, ethics, data security and privacy, and just the overall implementation of drone technology in harsh environments and in difficult contexts around the world. So I've been working on drone technology since about 2013, and ever since then, I've become really interested in ethical use of this technology in ways we can advance the technology and better understand the risk to improve the drone industry. And again, drones are really cool. Drones let anyone look at the world from above, and that's something that we couldn't do even a few years ago. Without drones, there's really very little way to look at the Earth from above unless you're rich, rich enough to have your own, back in the 1700s or 1800s, your own hot air balloon. If you have the skill to be a manned aircraft pilot, those were all restrictions to looking at the world from above and collecting that kind of aerial data. But nowadays, almost anybody can do that. We've really democratized the collection of aerial data. And that's really cool and impressive. And this capacity, this access, is what attracts humanitarian aid workers to drone technology. Humanitarian aid workers are very interested in big data, just as many of us in the private industry are. And they're really interested in ways to quickly and effectively and cheaply, because aid workers are notoriously underpaid, ways to make new conclusions about disaster and make their services better and more effective. As one example, in early 2019, a terrible cyclone hit Mozambique. So a bunch of people were displaced, a bunch of villages were destroyed, and the World Food Program used drone technology to map these flooded areas, and they used these maps for damage assessment purposes. And the World Food Program and the European Union's humanitarian wing are now mapping Mozambique's floodplains to ensure that a similar flooding disaster is less bad in the future and really mitigate the risk. That's just one of many awesome examples of how drone technology can be used to help people around the world. And I'm sure you guys can think of many other great examples. But here's the problem. If we want to see more use cases like this, if we're going to realize the remarkable potential of drone technology, we have to get serious about understanding what the actual risks of collecting that data are, and about considering both the upsides and the downsides of making the aerial view accessible to everyone. We've done a good job as an industry of considering the physical risk that drones represent. So the risk of a drone falling on somebody's head, the risk of a drone obstructing airspace. We take that really seriously. But we haven't considered as deeply the risk that drone data represent. And as we're learning in our current era of social media privacy scandals, holding more information about people or collecting more information isn't always a good thing. We need to do a better job of researching these risks. And we need to consider the fact that data can be either digital gold or toxic waste. It can be something that can both be incredibly valuable and something that can be really dangerous if we don't treat it with respect and responsibly. And people are concerned about drone data, as we know. They're concerned about these risks, and that makes people really uneasy about our technology. A drone's ability to effectively extend human sight is what most of us value about them, but it's also what makes a lot of people distrust drone technology. Military and civilian drones are enormously conflated in the popular imagination, as I've seen over and over in my work and my research. People project many of their fears of surveillance, loss of freedom, and other common, modern dystopian technological fears on the drone technology. It's a highly symbolic technology. I can't even tell you how many times I've heard some tough guy in a bar tell me when I say I work on drones that, oh, I'll totally shoot down a drone if I see one flying over my property. I'm sure that's probably happened to many of you as well. People get really defensive about drone technology. And while we know that civilian drones are, generally speaking, a pretty terrible way to spy on somebody in the era of smartphones and smart home devices, most people don't know that. Or at least, I'm pretty sure that people don't like drones. I'm pretty sure that people have these strong opinions about them because here's another problem. We have very little good public opinion research or policy research on drone technology. And actually, some of the best research that we do have is coming out of the University of Las Vegas right here. But there could be a lot more of it. And most of that research is restricted to the United States and Europe. So as one example of what that research, when it happens, looks like, there's some great research out of Denmark in recent years that found that people are most disturbed by the inscrutability of drones, the fact that it's hard to tell who is looking at you from the eyes of a drone, or who's behind it and what their motives are. That's really interesting information for us as drone industry and drone pilots, but we need more information like that to make choices and decisions based on it. And from the humanitarian perspective, we have almost no data about how people feel about drones outside of the US and Europe. We don't really know how people in African countries, in Asian countries, anywhere really that's not the US and Europe feel about drone technology. And that's a huge impediment to using drones responsibly and safely in these environments. In the absence of this research, we have to make guesses about what people are afraid of when it comes to drone technology. I'm sure many of us can. Things like people are afraid that you're going to look at them in their bathroom. People are afraid that you're going to look at them as their kids as they play in their backyard. Maybe they're even afraid that the police are going to use drones to spy on them as they perform dissident activities or just go about their business. These are concerns that I suspect are universal, but we lack the knowledge to really say that outright. But ultimately, all these concerns are linked to trust, and these concerns don't go away during disaster. In fact, they often get worse as people are affected by fear, insecurity, and trauma. I've talked to disaster responders who experienced being threatened by people as they responded to disaster with drone technology, because people just don't have a good way of knowing what the drone is up to. It's that inscrutability factor. They don't know what your motive is or why you're there, and in the absence of a universal UTM system, it's really hard to identify who's flying a drone and for what purpose. And that's a huge problem for aid workers, because aid workers' access to disaster environments and their safety is totally dependent on trust. They have to be perceived as impartial and neutral actors to stay safe. And if they think that drones are going to make them unsafe if they use them, if they think that people will conflate their drones, the military drones, if they think people will be afraid of them, they're not going to want to use them. The potential of drone technology will be lost if people don't trust drones. And here's a story about drones and trust and unexpected consequences. In the aftermath of the deadly 2015 Nepal earthquake, a lot of volunteer drone pilots came to the scene. It was kind of a coming out party for drone technology. It was all over the news and media. I wrote a bunch of stories about it. And these people had really great intentions. They were coming to Nepal to make maps, to participate in search and rescue, to help people. But the problem was a lot of these people, these drone pilots, not all, but many, lacked humanitarian experience. They lacked experience in Nepal. They didn't have a good sense of how incredibly complicated the humanitarian aid system is and what happens during these giant disasters when so many organizations are trying to coordinate, and coordinate airspace especially. And as a result, unfortunately, the drone response was kind of a mess. People were not coordinating. They weren't coordinating with the United Nations. They weren't coordinating adequately with the Nepalese government. And it caused a lot of consternation and stress because people just didn't know who's flying that drone and why. What are they up to? And eventually, the Nepalese government got so fed up with this that they decided to impose really harsh restrictions on drone technology not long after the disaster response to the earthquake began in Nepal. And their argument for this was that they were concerned that the drone imagery was going to reveal things they didn't want revealed, like sensitive military sites or cultural sites, and the drone pilots didn't have a way to get that information about sensitive sites from the Nepalese government, or they weren't coordinating, so they decided to crack down on the entire technology. And the problem with that is that that had a bigger impact on Nepalese people than the people who were coming in to help. Because that meant if you're a Nepalese entrepreneur or a Nepalese drone pilot, and they absolutely exist, I've met them, you have a big problem now because it's a lot harder for you to use the technology. The drone pilots were there to help, they wanted to volunteer, but they accidentally made things harder for Nepalese people in some respects. And that's an example of the unintended consequences that we need to be thinking about and attempting to avoid. This problem with the general distrust of drones and how it makes it harder to use them in humanitarian contexts and for those purposes. So when you hear this, you might think something like, oh, well, okay, so we just have to tell people that they actually don't have anything to worry about. We just have to tell people that drone data is safe. We're not going to spy on them in their bathroom. We're not going to look at their kids. We're not going to do any of that crap. But the problem with that is that, one, it's not particularly convincing, as I think you probably agree. And two, are we sure about that? Are we absolutely 100% sure that our drone data is safe, that we completely understand all the possible risks and issues and ways it can be used to hurt people? The ways that your average person, your average idiot even, or your average nasty sociopath might use our drone data. I don't think we can say that with confidence right now. I don't think we're there yet. I do not think we adequately understand the risks presented by drone data to people, and that's a problem. And if we don't understand how those risks might change for people affected by disaster or war or genocide, we don't have a good product for humanitarian aid workers. Or we don't have a good product for anybody, but especially for humanitarian aid workers. So here's some frameworks or ways to think about this privacy data security problem, or the frameworks I work with. So one, we talk a lot about PII, personally identifiable information. This can be a legal definition, but in the context I'm talking about, it refers to any kind of information pertaining to a human being, a single individual. So you, me, whoever, stuff like our face, our license plate, maybe even our daily travel patterns, that kind of stuff. But we're also talking increasingly in this privacy data security world about DII, demographically identifiable information. And that's information about you that might pertain to general categories of person, like your gender, your racial identity, maybe your ethnic identity, your religion, that kind of stuff. And that can also be picked up, at least theoretically. Actually, it can be picked up by a drone in certain circumstances. Now, if we think about these two categories of information, it helps us frame our thinking better about risk and what we can do to mitigate it. But we also need to do a better job of understanding, okay, what kinds of PII and DII can we collect with a drone? I mean, just now I had to guess, but where's the research that shows what kind of stuff are you most likely to collect so we can prevent ourselves from collecting it by accident? We just haven't done a good job of constructing what us humanitarian researchers call a theory of harm, a theory about how PII and DII from drone data can be used to hurt people. And we need that because the entire point of the humanitarian project is alleviating human suffering, neutrally and without bias. To quote philosopher and humanitarian Albert Schweitzer, humanitarianism consists in never sacrificing a human being to a purpose, which I really like in the context of technology. we don't understand drone data risk and how it might change disaster dynamics, we risk hurting people. And that's ethically terrible from a humanitarian viewpoint. Obviously, it's bad, but it's also bad for the drone industry. Because if people think that drones are too risky or have risks that aren't adequately understood or researched, they're not going to want to use them. They're not going to want to keep them legal to use in their countries or in their airspace. So how do we ensure that we're delivering on the promise that we all want to make, that we are behaving ethically and responsibly, that we're keeping people safe, that we understand the risks that drone data represent? How do we do that? Are there tools or methods or methodologies? Well, there kind of aren't right now, or not as many as there could be. I get asked this a lot in my working life, in my workplace. How do we do this? Like, how can I ensure that I've done everything I can to protect people's privacy? And I don't have a lot of good solutions or answers or tools, and that needs to change. We need to fix that soon. So here's one framework, picture. Lost the picture, but here's one way to think about this. It's an exercise that's often called red teaming. The idea is that to protect people effectively, you have to think like the nastiest people on planet Earth. Think like the most horrible person you can imagine. In other words, think about what would Thanos do from the Avengers movies, the supervillain. It's unpleasant, perhaps, but if you think like an evil person, then you can kind of anticipate what might happen if some horrible person gets their hands on your data. So the scenario I brought up at the beginning of this talk is one example of this kind of thinking. As you can anticipate these risks before you actually release your data or your technology into the wild, if you can imagine these things, you can get out in front of them. You can help protect people and do a better job of that. And that's really important. That's something that we need to be doing on a much more widespread basis. And not just in drone technology, God knows, but across the entire tech sector. I think everybody should be doing this much more often. Another important step is more research. And I'm obviously biased, but I think we need to do a better job of quantifying, clearly describing the actual risks that drones represent to people. Research we can point to when people come at us in the drone industry with what we think are overblown or silly claims about how dangerous drones are. Here's one example of good research along these lines. In 2017, researchers in the UK found that human beings couldn't reliably identify other human beings from Parrot AR drone photos shot from a maximum altitude of just 45 feet. That's really useful information, and I refer to it regularly. We should be doing more experiments just like this, in different contexts with different sensors and different types of drone, different altitudes, so we can put numbers to our efforts to reduce the risk of collecting personal, sensitive information. If we can point to this research, we can hopefully make people feel better about drone technology and prove that we've done the work of keeping people safe when we use our tech. We can also create clear technical training guides, pointers, and best practices, things we can teach other people and keep our people in our organizations, make them adhere to, or build that into our software, into our hardware as we move forward. Next, we also should think about developing technical solutions to this problem. So maybe we need to develop privacy analysis software. A lot of police departments are now using body cameras to document what they do during their day. As a result, a bunch of companies have sprung up that are offering redaction services for that body cam footage. So the idea is that, it helps an analyst, because you do have a human in the loop here, it helps an analyst go through that body cam footage and pull out stuff that might be sensitive or problematic. It speeds up that analysis process. Because I've gone through drone imagery and video searching for PII, and it's boring, it sucks. We could be doing this much more effectively. Another technical solution might be, there are ways we can reduce the drone's field of view in the air to ensure it's only looking at what we want it to look at. If we crop out areas of the image that really aren't related to what we want, so we can lower the risk of inadvertently capturing something we're not even interested in, but that could be a problem, and that we don't even notice at the time. So technical solutions like that would be incredibly helpful. And finally, we also need to talk to people in the sense that if we're doing humanitarian aid work or disaster response work, we have to understand the context really well, because data risks are pretty much always highly contextual. They're highly linked to the community, people's circumstances, all the stuff that we're not going to know if we just showed up 24 hours ago. If we talk to people and listen to them, they're going to be more inclined to trust us. They're going to be more inclined to trust that we're going to treat their data and themselves with respect. I mean, and also it'll help us learn things about risk. For example, if we talk to people, we might find out that some people have been evacuated after a hurricane, are really worried that if a drone image of their village goes up on the internet publicly, then people will discover they've got a really nice plot of cropland and they'll move to steal it from them before they manage to get back. Because land grabbing actually happens all the time in a lot of countries. It's a huge issue. And that's just one example of contextual data that we're not going to know about if we aren't asking people or speaking with people, if we're not listening. And also, we need to work to uncover the stories that drone data tell, or rather, we need to follow the data cradle-to-grave cycle. In other words, what happens to data after we capture it and hand it off to the end user, who's not a drone pilot, nothing to do with drones? What decisions do they make with that? Do they keep it safe? Who gets to look at it? Do we know? We really don't have a good sense of how this works in many cases. I mean, I've tried to do this cradle-to-grave mapping of data in the disaster response sector, and it's really difficult. So if we had more of this information, this sense of what happens to data after we release it into the wild, we'd have a better sense of how to keep people safe and how to understand the risk adequately. And ultimately, this all comes down to trust. It comes down to the fact that we need to do a better job of showing people they can trust us with research, with good research, with, again, contextual conversations, with good technical tools, showing people they can trust us instead of telling them they can trust us. As an example, think of the ongoing debate in the USA right now over local control over drone technology versus FAA preemption. I think a lot of that, in my experience reporting on this, is rooted in people's fear and distrust of drones. They don't trust the government will protect them from drones. There's no federal law. So they want to impose local restrictions because they don't trust us, they don't trust drone pilots to use their data responsibly. And if we don't move to do that ourselves, we don't take that responsibility to some extent on ourselves in ways that are realistic, people will make rules for us in ways that we don't like and really don't appreciate. It'll hurt the drone industry. If we want to build the drone industry, we have to build public trust. Then we have to research the risk in ways that are easy to communicate and that make sense to people. And if we think, this is a really important way for us to build trust and also to counter people who come at us with ridiculous ideas about how dangerous drones are. And the good news is, I think we can do this. I think we are going to be able to pull this off because new technologies always go through a period of social adjustment of fear. People were terrified of cars in the early days of motorized vehicles. People were afraid of airplanes. There's always going to be this fear and adjustment period. And we have a chance to change the narrative now. And we can do that with better research, proving that we are trustworthy. We prove we're responsible stewards of data in disaster response humanitarian aid. We can prove that we are going to do the same thing for all other industries. Humanitarian aid is just kind of the point of the spear where these issues become most evident, but they apply everywhere. And if we do this, we can build the drone industry in ways that are ethical and that help everybody, that really advance the drone industry in ways we can be proud of. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.